Welcome to Hauntcore Vault. If you are ready for horror tales, you are in the right place. If you are new, please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where are you from and what time you are watching. Let's begin. I was 10 years old when Grandma came to live with us. It was about 6 months after Granddad passed away, and I guess, looking back, she must have been lonely in that big house of theirs, rattling around with only the grief and memories for company. So despite a few protests from Mom, my parents took her in. There were no protests from me, none at all. Grandma was loud and fun, and I loved her. She had an almost limitless supply of boiled sweets, and she'd always slip me a couple whenever she saw me. She was always the first to stick up for me when I got in trouble, too. But it was her stories I loved best. Grandma had all kinds of stories. Stories about growing up during World War II, and stories about the things she'd get up to with her friends on the South Coast after her family had been evacuated. Sad stories, funny stories, adventure stories. But it was her scary stories that were my favorite. Grandma had lots of scary stories. She told me she dabbled in the occult when she was a teenager, trying out Ouija boards with her friends, tarot cards, fortune-telling, all that stuff. Most of the stories I'd laugh off or forget about not long after she was done telling them. But there were a couple that really did spook me a bit. I was only 10 at the time, you have to understand, and Grandma certainly knew how to bring the stories to life. She'd shut off the lights in my room so only the glow of the night sky shone through the curtains, and she'd shuffle in real close enough so I could see the wrinkles on her face and smell the boiled sweets on her breath, close enough so her deep blue eyes could stare straight into mine. She must have given me nightmares with a few of those tales, but now, years later, there's only one that I can still remember, only one that stuck with me. The story about the shower and Mr. Longfingers. Grandma told me about Mr. Longfingers one night after I asked about her baths. Grandma used to love her baths. She'd spend ages in them, light candles and incense, and lie in the tub humming to herself until the water turned cold. It drove my mom crazy. But when I asked her why she loved them so much, she said it was the only place she could relax. It was the only place that was safe for her to relax. You know, people like me who are, well, more sensitive to certain things, we have to have baths, she told me seriously one night, shuffling closer on the bed. I couldn't possibly spend that long in the shower. It'd be far too risky. Grandma stared at me with those blue eyes of hers, unsmiling, and I knew it was time for one of her stories, one of the scary ones. I shivered with pleasure and pulled the covers up to my chin. Why is it risky, Grandma? She half turned to look out the window, watching me from the corner of her eye, pausing for effect. I waited, feeling my heart rate pick up ever so slightly in my chest. Well, she said after a moment, it's only risky if you close your eyes, of course. If you close your eyes for longer than 10 seconds. What do you mean? Why? Well, do you ever play that game in the playground with your friends? The one where someone turns their back and the others sneak up on them when they're not looking? I nodded, and Grandma nodded back. Exactly. So that's what it's like in the shower when you have your eyes closed. That's what it's like with Mr. Longfingers. A cold itch tickled back. Who's Mr. Longfingers, Grandma? She let out a deep breath, as if she'd wish she hadn't said anything. Turned her head back to face mine. When she next spoke, she'd lowered her voice. No one knows exactly, Grandma whispered. Some think it's a creature that's attracted to the heat and smell we give off in there. Others think it's a demon that finds a way into our realm through the dense steam clouds. No one can say for sure, because the only ones who have actually seen Mr. Longfingers aren't ever going to be able to tell you. I pulled in a breath. Why not? Grandma shuffled closer along the bed and leaned towards me, leaving my question hanging in the air. Don't you worry about it, sweetheart. Don't you worry your pretty head. As long as you remember the rules, you'll be fine." "What rules?" "Well, when you're in the shower, you try not to close your eyes for too long. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too. But any longer than that—" "Yeah? Then what?" "Well, any longer than that, and you may just start to feel something in the room with you. Something watching. And if you ever go longer than 15 seconds, that's when you might start to hear a noise, too." "Hear what?" "The soft tap, tap, tap of fingers on glass. Fingers drumming against the glass door of the shower. If you ever do hear that noise, God forbid, will you make me a promise?" "What, Grandma?" "Promise me you'll never open your eyes." I barely slept that night. Hardly at all. I'd close my eyes and try to relax, but every time I did, I'd imagine a face pressed against my bedroom window, staring in at me. And when I did finally get to sleep, I had nightmares. Bad ones. I had them all week, in fact. Dreams about disembodied eyes watching me in the dark and long fingers reaching out to touch my exposed skin. It wasn't any better when I was awake, either. Not really. The shower was the worst. That's when Grandma's story really got to me. I'd never thought about it before, but suddenly I had trouble shutting my eyes in there. I'd be standing beneath the beating water, shampoo running down my face, and as soon as I squinted my eyelids closed, I'd hear Grandma's words running through my head. 5 seconds is fine, and 10 is just about okay too, but any longer than that? I'd rub my hair fast, feeling the shampoo dripping off my chin, and as soon as I'd counted past 5 seconds, I'd feel it. A sort of pressure. Not a feeling of being watched, exactly, but something close to that. I'd run my fingers faster and faster through my hair, frantically trying to get the suds out, and the ready blackness behind my closed eyes, coupled with the rush of water in my ears, would feel like a held breath, like the silence before a scream. The seconds would race through my mind, and I'd be so desperate to open my eyes again that I'd sometimes do it before my hair was rinsed fully clean, and my eyes would sting with shampoo. But before I shut them again, I'd always be sure to peer out through the steamed glass door of the shower cubicle, just to make sure I was still alone. It wasn't long before Mum realized something was up. She heard me crying out in my sleep one night and came in to comfort me, asked me what the matter was, and it all came out. I told her about Grandma's stories and about Mr. Long Fingers. She got this look on her face when I was telling her, like she used to get with me when I'd made her really mad, this wide-eyed, angry look. Only this time, she wasn't angry with me. She was angry with Grandma. My parents' room was next to mine, and sometimes, if I pressed my ear against the wall, I could hear them talking in there, soft whispers. That night, though, after Mum was satisfied I wasn't scared anymore and she'd gone back to her room, the whispers weren't soft at all. Oh no. I heard Mum hissing to Dad about Grandma, about the stories she'd told me. Mum's voice floated through the wall, sharp and crisp. "You know what your fucking mother said to him now? Don't you, Simon?" Dad's response was an unintelligible mutter. "She's told him there's a monster that'll get him if he shuts his eyes in the shower. A monster. The poor kid's been having nightmares about it all week. Seriously, Simon, you'd better say something to her tomorrow morning, first thing, or I will." Grandma came to visit me in my room the following night. That time, as she perched on the end of my bed, there were no stories, nothing like that. Grandma just sat there and stared down at me, her blue eyes wide and sad. The light from the moon outside my window lit up her wrinkled face. "You know I'd never let anything bad happen to you, don't you?" she said after a moment. "I know, Grandma." "You know I wouldn't let you come to any harm?" I nodded again. "Okay, good. That's good." She looked away from me for a moment, out the window. "You know, the things I tell you in the evening
are meant to help you, sweetheart. They're meant to toughen you up a bit, protect you." She paused and shook her head. "But maybe your mum's right. Maybe I went too far this time." She looked down at me and smiled. But even then, even though I was only 10 years old, I could tell it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll tell you what. You know what I told you about Mr. Long Fingers and the shower? Well, I'm going to make sure you're safe. I'll scare the bastard off. How about that? It won't come back in a hurry if it has to face me." I stared up at Grandma, watching her face glow in the moonlight, watching her smile down at me. I nodded my head, once. I was the one who found her. I don't know when exactly it happened, but I'd guess it was about a week after we had that talk in my room, after she told me she wouldn't let me come to any harm. I woke early that morning from a bad dream to a heavy thumping sound. I sat bolt upright in bed. My room was quiet around me, and I couldn't hear anything from the wall that joined my parents' room either. But the house wasn't entirely silent. Floating down the hall, muffled by my closed door, I could hear the sound of rushing water, the noise of the shower.
I leapt out of bed and ran down the upstairs hallway, heart already pounding in my chest. As soon as I reached the closed bathroom door, I started banging on it. A deep terror was welling up inside me, like cold water from a well, something I couldn't place, and I kept banging and shouting, "Grandma," over and over again, even though she didn't respond. Off to my right, I was dimly aware of voices from my parents' room, the sleepy shuffle of footsteps, but before they had a chance to make it out onto the landing, I'd lifted my hand to test out the door handle, more out of instinct than because I thought it might actually open. But the door wasn't locked. I kept banging with my free hand, and it swung suddenly inwards, bringing me face to face with a wall of steam. Heat struck my skin. I squinted my eyes against the damp fog and peered into the bathroom. And before Dad pushed me to one side, before everything around me descended into shouting and tears and chaos, I saw her. I saw Grandma. She was lying naked on the floor in the shower cubicle, the water beating down around her, blue eyes bulging from her face. One hand was curled against her chest like a dead bird, while the other trailed against the glass of the shower cubicle, the flailing finger marks she'd carved through the steam still clear and fresh. It was a heart attack that killed her. That's what my dad told me. He said Grandma was old, and the thing had struck her quickly and suddenly. She would have died fast and without pain, Dad said. She wouldn't have suffered. I knew better, though. Even as a 10-year-old kid, I knew better. And years later, writing this as an adult, I still know better. I also know my wife and kids resent me for refusing to have a shower in the house, for insisting everyone take baths. They pretend it's okay, and they humor me, but I can tell they don't really understand it. Not at all. My wife thinks she does. She thinks I still carry the trauma of seeing my grandmother dying in front of me when I was little. I guess she's right, in a way. But she doesn't know the full truth. Nobody does. And no one would believe me, even if I told them. No one would believe me if I said the reason I don't take showers, the reason I haven't had one since I was 10 years old, isn't because I'm scarred from the sight of a dead body. It's because all those years ago, when I crept back into the still hot bathroom after the paramedics had taken Grandma's body downstairs, I made sure to check the marks her fingers had carved through the steamed glass of the shower cubicle. And those marks weren't just on the inside.
The day I turned 5. I must have been repressing that day for years, because it's taken weeks of therapy for me to unlock it. "Grandma, will you tell me a story before bed?" She was halfway to the bedroom door when my words stopped her. I didn't want her to go. Grandma had just tucked me in and turned off my bedside lamp, and I suddenly felt afraid. Partly it was the darkness of my bedroom. The shadows were so thick I could barely make out my stuffed toys, sitting in a row on top of my dresser. But mainly it was my new birthday present, the present Grandma had got me. It wasn't my main present. That was the pack of monsters in my pocket toys I'd ripped open downstairs. No, this was an extra present, a secret present. I hated it. Even in the dark, I could see its shadowy outline on my bedside table. The thing gave me the creeps. A story? Well, what kind of story would you like to hear? It was a silly question, because Grandma only ever told me one kind of story, the scary kind. But because I was already a bit freaked out, I said something I wouldn't normally have done. Nothing too scary, Grandma. Grandma raised her eyebrows at me. Not too scary? I shook my head. She leaned over and switched my bedside light back on, then perched at the foot of my bed, smiled down at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Grandma's present. It was watching me from my bedside table. I did my best to ignore it. "Okay," said Grandma, making herself comfortable. "I think I'll tell you a story about a witch." "Once upon a time," Grandma began, "there was a young woman who lived in a cottage by the sea. She didn't have a care in the world. She went to school, and she painted, and she read adventure books by the fire in the evening. This girl lived with her mother and her grandmother, and they were all very close. She loved her family very much. One day in the early summer, the girl was coming home from school when she met a boy on the path. She'd never spoken to him before, but she recognized him well enough. He wore the same uniform she did, after all, and she guessed he must be in the year above her at school. "Where are you off to?" said the boy. His shirt was untucked, and he was smoking a cigarette. The girl hesitated. Her mother had told her cigarettes were bad. She'd also told her never to speak to strangers on her way home from school. But then again, thought the girl, was this boy actually a stranger? The headmaster at their school said they were all one big family. If this boy wore the same uniform as her, they couldn't really be strangers, could they? "I'm going home. My house is along this path." The boy finished his cigarette, then flicked it into the grass. He smiled at the girl. "Before you go home, don't you want to see something cool?" he asked. The girl was curious, but she also knew she couldn't be late. Her mother would worry terribly if she was late. So she thanked the boy and told him she had to be on her way. But just as she'd walked past him, he called out to her again. "It's a puppy," said the boy. "Our dog had a litter of puppies last week, and Dad said I could keep one. It's in this old barn near my house. Don't you want to see the puppy?" Now, the girl loved puppies. She'd wanted a dog for as long as she could remember, but her mother always said they couldn't afford one. Right then, she'd have given anything in the world to pet a cute little puppy. When she closed her eyes, she could just picture it, a happy little dog with a big pink tongue and a wagging tail. Eager to meet her, the girl paused and looked down the path that led back to her house. She thought about her mother. Then she looked back at the boy, who was smiling at her. Was there really any harm, thought the girl, in taking a quick look? So the girl followed the boy, and he led her over a stile and across a big field, and they kept going and going until the girl saw a large barn towering in the distance, and she was so excited that she walked as fast as she could, and the boy laughed and walked right along with her. The girl only started to feel nervous when they were right outside the barn. It had taken longer to get there than she'd thought it would, and the sun was a lot lower in the sky now. She was going to be late getting home.
Her mother would be worried. She wanted to see the puppy quickly so she could hurry back, but the barn was dark and full of shadows, and she couldn't see any sign of it inside. "It's just over here at the back," whispered the boy as he took her hand and led her into the shadows. "He's going to be so excited to see you." So the girl took his hand and followed him, and even though his palm was sweaty, she held onto it tight because she was suddenly starting to feel afraid. It was only when she heard footsteps and laughter behind her and turned to see two bigger boys emerging from the barn shadows that the fear inside her turned to terror. When the girl finally got back home, the sun was setting over the ocean and the sea was the color of blood. The girl made it through the door of the little cottage before she collapsed in a heap in the hallway, crying her eyes out. It was her grandmother who found her like that. Now the girl's grandmother was very old and very wise. Mother used to tell her that Grandma had lived so long and seen so much that she knew all the world's secrets. When she was little, the girl had been frightened of her grandmother. But now the old lady took the young woman in her arms and she comforted her, told the girl her mother was working late and she wouldn't be home for a while, told the girl she could tell her anything she wanted.
And in the hallway of their little cottage, the girl did. She told her grandmother about the boy and the barn and all the horrible things those bigger boys had done to her in the shadows. And her grandmother listened, and she grew very silent and very still. "Come with me," she said. The girl had hardly ever been in her grandmother's room before. When she was little, it always gave her the creeps. Her grandmother had lots of old, scary paintings on the walls and strange little statues and carvings on her shelves. But right then, as her grandmother led her to an old wooden chair and sat her down, the girl hardly even noticed them. Her grandmother was speaking to her in a soothing voice, and all she could do was listen. She listened as her grandmother told her that there was a special trick she knew, a trick to protect against evil, a trick to protect her against those horrible boys so that they'd never be able to hurt her again, so that she'd have control of them. As grandmother spoke, she fetched an old wooden box from the bottom of her wardrobe and unlocked it. Inside the box were countless knitted dolls. All of the dolls were the same blank creme color, with no facial features at all save for the eyes. Every single doll had a pair of eyes that seemed to follow the girl. As grandmother pulled 3 dolls out of the box, she closed her own eyes, began to whisper. The sound made the girl's skin itch, but it didn't last long. Soon her grandmother had lined the dolls up on the carpet, and her eyes were open again. The last thing she pulled from the box were a pair of black knitting needles and some yarn. "Those boys that hurt you, sweetheart," she whispered, "I want you to describe them to me." And although she was still terrified, and although it made her feel sick, the girl did. She described the boys as well as she could remember. She described them as her grandmother went to work with her needles. And finally, with the blood-red sun disappearing below the sea outside the cottage window, the dolls were finished. The girl's grandmother took the girl by the hands and looked into her eyes. "I want you to keep hold of these dolls, sweetheart," she whispered. "As long as you have possession of them, those boys will never be able to hurt you again." And do you know what? Those boys never did. The girl was sitting in an armchair overlooking the sea when her grandmother burst through the door of the cottage. It was 2 days after they'd made the dolls, and for the first time since she'd met the boy on the pathway, the girl was feeling calm again. She was feeling calm, but her grandmother clearly wasn't. As the girl turned from the window and smiled in greeting, the old woman held a newspaper out to the girl with shaking hands. 3 brothers tortured and killed in brutal mass slaying, read the headline. "Agatha," whispered her grandmother. "Oh, Agatha, what did you do?" But the girl just kept smiling.
She kept smiling as she took her grandmother by the hand and led her upstairs to her bedroom. She kept smiling as she opened her little cupboard and pulled out a cardboard box. And when the old lady cried out in shock and horror as she saw the 3 dolls inside, the girl kept smiling still. "What did you do, Agatha?" whispered her grandmother again. But it was pretty obvious what the girl had done. Each of the dolls had been impaled with at least a dozen sewing pins, all of which had been pushed through their knitted heads. The area below each of their waists had been burnt black with a flame. The girl smiled down at her work and took her grandmother's shaking hands in her own. "They won't be hurting anyone now, will they, sweetheart?" she whispered. "You see, sweetheart," said Grandma as she stood up from my bed and switched off the light. "I gave you one with a happy ending." I lay in the dark, feeling sick. I don't think I'd understood everything Grandma had told me, not right then at least, but I'd understood enough. I'd understood enough to know I felt worse now than I had before the story started. "Grandma, wait," I said, my voice stopping her mid-turn. "Isn't your name Agatha?" Grandma looked back at me and smiled. She walked over and leaned down, kissing me on my forehead. "Time to get some sleep, Christopher," she whispered. "And remember, that present I got for you is always there if you ever need it." She stood up and left my bedroom. I stared after her. But a few moments later, my eyes were pulled back to the gift on my bedside table. The knitted doll. It gazed right back at me, its face featureless, save for 2 blank, staring eyes.